This week on RSBANDB Update, Mod Pebble joins us to discuss Purple Tuesday and a drive for accessibility within RuneScape. We then learn about Kharid's Garden arriving Monday, and we recap Jagex's 2021 financials and look at RuneScape going to print with Titan Publishing. This is RSBANDB Update, episode 907, recorded Thursday, November 3rd, 2022. Purple accessibility. Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of RSBANDB Update. This week is a busy week here at the podcast. We got a lot to talk about, a lot of news relating to the updates, but we're going to actually dive straight in this week because we do have a very special guest on the podcast this week, joining Tanis and myself to talk about accessibility. And I know, Tanis, this is something you and I talk about for every update that comes out, and it's just such a privilege to be able to have this discussion today, given what this week is.
Yeah, this is very near and dear to my heart, as all of you know, and I couldn't be more excited to have who we have today.
That's right. And joining us on the podcast this week is Mod Pebble, a QA analyst on the RuneScape team, and she's here to talk about accessibility. Welcome aboard.
Yeah. Nice to be on here.
This week was Purple Tuesday, which is a global social movement for improving the experience for disabled people and their families. And as such, the RuneScape team has put out a survey asking about accessibility in RuneScape. And we're going to talk with you, Mod Pebble, just about that. But before we begin, I'll just remind our listeners that we have full show notes available at update.show. If you want to follow along with us, you can find me in game at Shane12088. Tanis can be found at Tanis79. And Mod Pebble, is there anything you'd like to say to introduce yourself before we jump straight in?
Oh, I guess I can say I'm Mod Pebble. I'm a QA analyst on RuneScape. I've been on the team for 5 years almost, so quite a while now. And I've been focusing on accessibility for the past 2 years now or so. And when the opportunity for Purple Tuesday came up, it was sort of fell naturally to me. So, yeah. That's
really great to hear. And everybody, when we look at accessibility, probably thinks that's something that people who might just have a hearing impairment or a visual impairment might use. But if we look at this broadly, what is accessibility in your perspective?
Accessibility, it's such a large topic. There are so many areas of what accessibility is, and it's a tough one to sort of narrow down to any one thing. But I guess accessibility to me, it's about removing the barriers for people to be able to play the game as we would want them to play the game. So if we talk about visual accessibility, for example, being able to see the boss or being able to see an NPC isn't a part of the challenge of the game.
Right.
So removing those barriers to allow those players to play the game is what accessibility is about, I guess.
All right, and I think that kind of answers the next one about why it's so important for RuneScape, because to use the analogy you just said, for somebody who doesn't have any accessibility needs, we take it for granted that we can see the boss or hear whatever sound cue is happening that's telling us what's going to happen next. But I guess in that case, if accessibility isn't taken to heart on that, that just makes the game so much more difficult for that segment of the player base.
Absolutely, yeah. And it can cover such a wide variety of things. Like if you're looking at sort of environment, and if there's lots of visual clutter on there, for someone with ADHD or anything like that, your mind might be jumping to everywhere in the map rather than to the NPC that's hidden away at the corner, for example. And stuff like that is sort of how wide-reaching it can be, especially for how much of our player base or how more common something like ADHD or neurodivergence is.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because when it comes to accessibility in games, most of us are just going to think of, the typical accessibility menu that you would see and the impact that has on gameplay or the other tool sets that are involved. And most of the time, if somebody's not visually impaired, hard of hearing, or living with accessibility needs that go beyond those sensory ones that I just mentioned, people don't think about accessibility. And in some cases, I've even heard of cases where non-native English speakers would use subtitles as an accessibility tool just to increase their immersion in the game world. So I guess this just leads to the big question about why. Why should people who don't have a disability care about accessibility in a video game, amongst all things?
This is a very good question, and it's something I've thought a lot about. It's accessible. Something I always go about saying, being front and foremost, is accessibility is for everyone. And accessibility features, like you said, someone who isn't a native English speaker can turn on subtitles. But it can also extend to temporary needs. If you have a baby that's asleep and you want to play a game and listen to the game but cannot have audio on, you can turn on subtitles. Or if you've broken your arm, for example, you can turn on one-handed modes to make the game easier for you to play whilst you're temporarily unable to use that other arm. And there's also, like, if you drop your glasses or you break your glasses, having high contrast modes or being able to increase the UI size and help you around that as well. And we see a lot of this in other games as well, where the best options for being able to play games is delving into the accessibility options, turning down textures or making enemies greater contrast so that you're able to see them against like dark backgrounds and things. And we see a lot of that across the industry and across games in general, of all of these temporary needs. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it, just all of these temporary needs.
Yeah, and you mentioned high contrast mode in particular, and I'll just call back to a tweet that you sent out in June from a game jam. You started working on high contrast mode for RuneScape with specific object highlighting and whatnot, and that kind of gives a glimpse of what it could look like. Obviously, at an early state, but folks want to see that, we do have that linked in the show notes. So that was certainly very interesting to see when it came across my radar. And so I guess with all of that and the discussion about why players should care, and that leads us to our next topic about what an individual player can do in relation to improving accessibility, which I'm certain we have an answer to on this. But before we dive too far into that, can you give the listeners a brief overview of what Purple Tuesday is, if they have not heard of it so far?
As we've spoken about before, Purple Tuesday, it's a global social movement designed to improve the customer experience for disabled people and their families. And this covers a wide variety of industries. So the retail industry, eBay are heavily involved in it this year, etc. And it comes to all the little things like, I can't remember what it was called. It was either the daffodil or the sunflower movement, where those with invisible disabilities like autism, etc., would be able to wear like a card that would show that they have a disability and that they need some extra help from those people. And Purple Tuesday is really about bringing that to the forefront and raising awareness around disability as a whole, because it is a very undervalued topic in a lot of places.
All right, fair enough. And with that, I think we head into the survey and initiative you guys are leading for Purple Tuesday on this. And I know Tanis, you wanted to ask a few points on this.
I would just like to start with, so what is the goal of your team with this survey?
Yeah, so when sort of The agreement to get involved into Purple Tuesday sort of fell down to me. It was very difficult. The game is very large as a whole, and there is a lot of areas that we can improve on, and probably a lot of areas where we don't know what we need to improve on. And so realistically, before we can make any fixes or can make any big changes to the game, we needed a way to talk to our player base, particularly our disabled player base, and ask them what impacts them and how can we help make the game better for them. Because without asking our players and without getting that wide variety of experiences, there is no way we would be able to make the changes that we need to be making and targeting the right areas.
And what I can see from that, in terms of just looking at the survey, one thing that was incredibly eye-opening to me is just the breadth of questions that you did ask on this. And as we highlighted in the previous segment, it wasn't just a question of the sensory impairments, visual, auditory, etc. You covered the entire spectrum on that, and that was incredibly eye-opening to me as well on that, just as a player, to learn a little bit more about that. So I think it's a good level of awareness, and bringing this to the player base is hopefully going to be beneficial to you guys. Yeah,
absolutely. And if you look at sort of the disabled community as a whole, 80%, I believe it's 80% if my numbers are correct, are invisible disabilities, which it's so taking into account neurodivergence and stuff, it's something that we really need to be including, because otherwise we are going to be missing the important experiences as well.
Well, I have a question for you, Mod Pebble. When you're looking at the different kinds of disabilities, and you're looking at, things more in the cognitive realm and things like that, what are some of the things that you try to design for, and some of the accessibility measures that you've been exploring when it comes to those particular disabilities?
It's a difficult topic because of how widely neurodivergence affects different people. Everyone is going to sort of have different experiences with it. It's a tough one to design for, and something we sort of generally have to keep in mind, especially, as I've said before, sort of understanding that if there are lots of elements on the screen, it might distract away from what we want the players to be focusing on. Or maybe for someone with ADHD, it might be very difficult for them to concentrate on skilling for long periods of times. Or it might get very overwhelming if they're taking lots of damage from different sources. And it's things like that we need to sort of keep into account. Obviously, there's only so much we can do in that area, but it's something to keep in mind regardless.
Well, very, very much, and that's great, because that is something that, and not only does that cut with those kinds, but it can also affect many different kinds. Like, as a visually impaired person, that visual clutter, it gets me. Something that I tell people too is, with a little bit of extra time, I can do just about anything. But when I'm dealing with timed events and I'm looking at a small piece of a screen because my field of view is restricted, that can be very very difficult. So yeah, there's a lot that you can kind of dig in with that. Now, I have another question about the survey. Now, it specifically asks about what part of the game do your disabilities most affect. So going into this, did you have any preconceptions of what you thought would be the most challenging parts of games for people?
Yeah, there was preconception-wise, there was definitely a few areas that I suspected. I was definitely suspecting color blindness to be an issue, and as well as sort of visual impairments, because parts of the game can be very difficult to read, especially picking up some parts, like dungeoneering, for example. There's a certain puzzle which is very bad for people with color blindness, or just in general, because the light doesn't show up against the background appropriately. And that was definitely one area I suspected would be quite big coming up to this. And then there was also some elements I was expecting where reaction times on bosses and stuff would be particularly difficult for some people. So can you react quick enough to this mechanic and things like that? So I definitely had some preconceptions there, but some are harder to design for than others.
I understand, and I can definitely vouch for what you have already suspected. Those are all things that are challenging, and I can especially remember before. And loot beams have their own special thing, but one thing that comes to mind is when dungeoneering didn't have loot beams for the keys. I don't know how many times I got yelled at for going through a room and seeing a key and just not knowing it was there. So, I feel that one deeply myself.
Yeah.
So now, does this survey represent a renewed push to get accessibility into more game updates?
Absolutely. It's a challenge regardless, and we're always going to make mistakes on this. But there is definitely a renewed push for greater accessibility into our game, and paying more of a focus onto accessibility, as well as going back and fixing anything that might have caused issues in the past. This survey really was to know where we need to prioritize and to raise anything that we might not be aware of as a company.
And one thing I want to highlight now that we're talking about the survey and just how important this is, and what I want everybody to do out there, and we'll have a link in the show notes to the survey at update.show. I want everybody to go fill out this survey, because you do have an option to say, I do suffer from a disability, or I don't. And if you do, you have a field on there where you specifically ask what part of the game could be improved. If there was one update that could be brought to the game to improve accessibility, you ask for that in a very open field. So I want everybody to go and have a look at this survey. It's something that I know, Tanis, you have said time and time again that if I could have one accessibility update, it would be X. And this is the opportunity for everybody in that boat, and even people who don't need accessibility features or don't think they need accessibility features right now. This is your opportunity to fill out this survey. And one thing I appreciated about this is that you didn't just link the survey and allow people who have accessibility needs to fill it out. There's even an option for people who don't have those needs to fill out this survey as well. And that's something that I appreciate, just being able to do that. But I really just want to call home this survey and bring focus to it, because I feel like this is something that the community needs to hear about. And that's primarily why we're having this discussion here this week with you, Mod Pebble. And we're going to talk a bit about the accessibility journey that RuneScape took. But before we move on to that discussion, do you have anything that you would like to say in particular in relation to the survey for people to keep in mind, or just anything about it when people are filling it out?
I guess, yeah, I think especially for if you could make one fix to the game to make it more accessible for you, what would it be? Question. It is very open, and definitely encourage you to sort of think about if you could request any one feature in the game, if you could request one thing that would make your life better, definitely take a little bit to think about that and sort of note down what it is that would make the most impact to you. That way we know how to prioritize what we want to do and when to schedule these things in. Because if it's like a lot of things there, then it can be hard to know how to prioritize it. So breaking it down into what one thing would make your life, or would make the most impact to you, is nice to hear about.
Okay. So with that being said, if you take the survey, if you decide to take the survey, please do fill out the open field near the end. The open fields near the end. That would greatly help out what Mod Pebble is working on.
So I just also want to just reemphasize that even if you aren't someone that needs accessibility in the game, that a lot of accessibility updates actually will make the overall game experience better. And the reason I can say that is we've had updates like skyboxes, filters, object outlining, the audio cues from the Arc Laker. A lot of things have come into game that were not, billed as accessibility updates. They were for everybody, but they really made a difference for me and for people, that are dealing with different challenges, interface scaling. I could go on and on.
Absolutely.
So it helps everyone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why, we don't want people to see that this is an accessibility survey and, say that, hey, I have close to 20/20 vision, I can hear just fine, I'm going to ignore this. No, if you're listening to this podcast, you should definitely fill this survey out, because it'll help the team and it'll help everybody's experience who plays RuneScape. So,
absolutely.
With that, we're going to, and Tan has mentioned a number of updates, and we're going to talk about the journey of accessibility, because this is something that we've touched on before on the podcast at various points. But Tanis, I don't think we've ever actually collated all this into one segment on this, because when you look at accessibility in RuneScape, it's got an interesting origin, because if you go back to 2001, 2004 for RuneScape 2, it was a game that was played in a web browser, and the game window was fixed. And, of course, now we've got a standalone client, a modifiable UI, text scaling, UI scaling, and whatnot. But there have been times throughout RuneScape's history where it's done things that have been good and bad. And, with that, we start from the fixed small window user interface web browser experience. And back then, if you look at this from an accessibility angle, it might seem bad, but, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Mod Pebble. Tanis, tell everybody why this wasn't necessarily the worst at the time.
No, actually, I was in search of an MMO RPG back in 2008. Now, it might have been 7. Anyway, it was before Windows had a built-in magnifier. So I was still using a third-party software called ZoomText. Now, ZoomText was a wonderful tool that I could magnify everything on my screen. The problem is it did not play well with other programs that would play in their own full screen windows, and a lot of games at that time did not have window mode. So that means that I could not play a World of Warcraft or Guild Wars or anything like that. It wasn't I couldn't do it. So I came to RuneScape because it was in a browser and I could use my ZoomText in the browser. So even though it had the smaller fixed window, this gave me an opportunity to play the kind of game that I wanted to play that I couldn't play anywhere else.
And when you start splitting that apart, that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because, of course, I'm sure you look back at that UI Mod Pebble before 2008 and 2004, and your accessibility mind probably says, "Sheesh, what was going on with that?" But on the other hand, you have Tanis's experience here, so I was just curious if you'd ever run into any kind of perspective like what Tanis has just said on that.
In a weird way, I think I do prefer the older interfaces from an accessibility standpoint. They are a lot smaller. Text isn't great, the size of the models aren't great and stuff, but because there is so much less going on the screen, it's a lot less overwhelming. And
Right.
like I, as a player, play on legacy mode because I find the RuneScape, the modern interface, a lot more overwhelming for me. So in a weird way, I can definitely agree with that. It being so small, however, it does surprise me that you found that to be a benefit for accessibility for you.
Well, and it's because I could use my magnification software,
Absolutely.
and normally I couldn't, right? So there's all kinds of little things that were difficult.
Yeah.
Like with the mouse over text being in the upper left hand corner, right? That was very difficult because if you're
Yeah.
using a magnifier, my field of view is smaller. So I can I couldn't see that mouse over text while doing what I was doing. And over time that has gotten much better with, actual mouse over text and things of that nature. You being able to do keybinds was huge for me.
Yes.
So that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, mine, this originally, it came from being able to use the other assistive tech that I had available that I just couldn't use with any other game.
Accidental accessibility.
Yes.
And boy, we're lucky that RuneScape stuck with you. And you mentioned keybinds in particular because that takes us to RuneScape 3 in 2013 with the new interface that came on board. Players can customize their own UI, of course, with this. And I know you have said, Tanis, that it's allowed for better use of screen magnifiers because you could choose where to put things on the screen. But of course, the pitfall of this at the time was that we still didn't have UI or text scaling on this. And I'm going to kind of jump back to what you said, Mod Pebble, about how from a personal perspective you prefer the old UI sometimes because the modern one can be so complicated and busy. And I remember going back when we were first evaluating RuneScape 3 here at the podcast, I said, this UI at some point is going to confuse people just because people are able to lay out so many different panes and whatnot about that. And of course, you look at Twitch streamers, you look at YouTube videos, you see these elaborate, complicated RS UIs, and obviously people have chose to lay that out for their own purposes. But at the same time, I could imagine that having the default, the same defaults that you guys have now is something that's good with that as well on the accessibility side to ensure that just if somebody messes things up too far, we got a sane default that we can all go back to on that. But Tanis, overall, would you say that RuneScape 3 in 2013 was a net positive or not for accessibility from your perspective?
It was a start, but it had a long way to go.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the UI and text scaling and whatnot. And maybe we can just go a little bit into your background, Mod Pebble. Do you play RuneScape outside of work? And were you around when RuneScape 3 came out?
Yeah, I've played RuneScape for how long has it been? 2006. So
okay.
16 years?
Okay, so a long time, just like us.
Yes, yeah, I've played RuneScape for a very long time, so I have a lot of experience all the way from the old version of the game through to RS3 and beyond. It's definitely been an interesting experience. And I think I found that, obviously, since starting work at Jagex, and especially since the move to work from home, I've found less of a want to be playing RuneScape in my own time, simply because working on the game all day and then at the same station playing the game in the evening was getting quite bad for my mental health.
Yeah, fair enough.
I had to take a step back from that.
Yeah.
So I started playing old school now for the most part.
Okay, yeah. And, we could have an entire accessibility conversation on old school as well, because if you don't use the third-party clients, you still have that fairly limited UI in that perspective on that. And I know, Janice, that's why you said you were never able to go back and try old school, because you didn't want to give up the creature comforts that you had accessibility wise today.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Like I look back and sometimes I think, how was I able to even do what I did? Because now, maybe I'm a little spoiled with some of the things that I do have. But I couldn't. Yeah, I can't go back, not without the keybinds and some of the very basic things.
Yeah, and
I have.
And, we talked about the launch of RuneScape 3, and obviously with RuneScape 3 came the 6th Age and a whole load of quests, and quests have proven difficult for those with visual impairments, and I'd imagine it factors in with other impairments as well. A few that come to mind are Dishonor Among Thieves, as it requires a wide field on the view for wide field of view on the screen for one of the puzzles. And The Light Within, I heard interesting stories from Tanis's side on the moving objects puzzle on that. So,
and many more. I call these the RuneScape eye test. Yeah,
yeah, and we understand that when these quests are designed, they're designed as puzzles and such. And with this mod Pebble, I guess the question to you is, how much of is there, obviously with our discussion on the survey and Purple Tuesday, is accessibility something that is thought about often in terms of quests and such?
It's definitely considered more and more recently. I think you'll see this in quests that have time limits or require you to click things in certain ways. So I believe Heartstealer Quest, recently came out, and you were given a number of seconds to identify an object that you needed to find, and then click on that object. And there is an accessibility option within that where if you fail, I believe it's either if you fail once or if you fail twice or however many times, you are given the option to slow down how long it takes.
Right.
Yeah, and stuff like that is very much considered, but we still have a way to go, and some things can be forgotten about or not identified. So it's a mixed bag, but it's definitely something we're trying to be better on and trying to improve on.
Yeah,
but it's a journey.
And now that you mentioned puzzles and whatnot, I think the Erebus puzzle in Extinction, I think of the combat encounter in Daughter of Chaos, and when you look at it at the end of the day, sure, that's the case of the puzzle being too difficult for someone, but those are also accessibility modes in the quest as well, in terms of just making it easier and factoring in that, maybe somebody might not be able to navigate through Erebus successfully, or maybe they don't have the field of view to utilize the combat system to its full potential. Yeah,
absolutely.
And these are updates that are brought to the game that people just see as being part of the quest and such. And where I want to go next with this is one of the updates that came with NXT. I think the new game plan in 2016 was the advent of skyboxes. And I can talk about skyboxes, but Tanis, you're the one who can really talk about skyboxes. And there's a question at the end of this for Mod Pebble, so go for it, Tanis.
Cool.
Okay, so for me, skyboxes were one of the biggest game changers. Now we've had game changers, since then, but this was the first real big one once we got past, keybinds and not having to rely on my mouse for everything. And what they do for me is like I was using the example, I think in pre-show, where I have been, I had to mine Baynite because I'm, just hardcore into this fresh start worlds, and it's all white. It's up there in the Arctic, it's north of Fremennik, and you can't see, or I can't see, the rock opportunities, which when you're in fresh start, you need to be following those rock opportunities, right? We're not playing with perfect potions. We're not playing with stone spirits. You need to follow the rock opportunity. And so it's very difficult to see on that white background. So what I do is I turn the skybox to Eclipse, and then I enable a high contrast filter. Basically what that does is it allows me to be able to position the screen in such a way that those rock opportunities are then visible on the black background. And I've used that in many times. I've used another one that used to get me was the ice strike worms. I could never see them on the ground, could never see them moving. So what I would do was I would actually invert colors and use that filter, and that would give me enough contrast where I'd be able to see them move. And so that's just a few examples, but I've used them a lot of times, and they're just always super helpful. And I call it it's definitely a hidden accessibility update. I think it was meant for content creators, but it just opened up a whole new world for me.
And that leads to the question, have things like skyboxes, obviously, like Tana said, initially meant for content creators, have those been thought of more internally through the dev process as something that's a bit of more of an accessibility tool now?
I think, honestly, I've got to say no. I don't think that it's really been considered as anything that is improved people's accessibility. So it's very interesting to hear those stories that they can be used to help see things or to help interact with things. It's very interesting. It's definitely one of those things that is options creating accessibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And you do see that a lot in a lot of places where just the sheer amount of gameplay options available to people does create accessibility.
Yeah, and another one Tana said, I think it was the Christmas loop beam, right? Because it has the sound and the snowfall from it, right?
Yeah, I have been asking for an accessible loop beam forever. Give me an alarm, give me something, because I missed a decayed tooth one time. I've never gotten over it.
God.
Yeah, right. But yeah, the big loop beams that had the big present, that's what I use now, because it's easier to see, it's higher contrast, and there's a little bit of a sound cue. So yeah, and those are things that you just, I don't know if they were ever intended as accessibility updates, but they definitely made a very big difference for me. Along with the changes we saw for mobile with the object outlining, that helped me so much in being able to figure out where those click boxes are.
Yes.
That was very difficult before then. Even updates that you might not even think of, like the graphical updates that we saw with the free-to-play areas, that actually created more contrast where I could tell the foreground from the background a lot easier.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And this is just something that we're highlighting on this accessibility push, and it's obviously a learning experience for us. It's a learning experience for the team at Jagex. It's a learning experience for the player base. It's a learning experience for everybody on this. And what we wanted to highlight with that is that there's just so many little updates that come out that might be geared as tools for everybody else, but in reality, they are accessibility options for somebody else. And then you have, on the flip side, you have skills that were designed to be accessible. And with this, we go to two favorites: the mining and smithing rework with the sound keys for both mining and smithing. It feels like those were, from our perspective, two things that really stood out on that, but specifically the sound cues that worked their way into those updates. And I haven't had a chance to ask Mod Jack on this, if the sound cues for mining and smithing were intended as an accessibility feature, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on sound cues like that, Mod Pebble.
So I wasn't too directly involved in those projects, so I can only say so much. But at least from my experience with these things is that whilst they are very much accessibility features, they're also part of those things that help the wider player base as well. Because RuneScape is very much a second screen game for most people, right?
Sure.
So if you're looking away from your screen, and you're watching a YouTube video and you hear that sound cue to say that the opportunity has moved or something has changed, that is a prompt for the player. And because of those things, it also becomes an accessibility option and also becomes an accessibility benefit.
All right, that's fair. And, you know, we also had the entire saga of the Elder God Wars, and we had, from our perspective when we were discussing this on the podcast at the time, good and bad experiences. Battle of the Monolith was certainly an interesting time to hear your perspective on that, Tanis. Carapac also posed some interesting challenges from, I think you said, the field of view perspective on that. But like you mentioned, on the other hand, you had Archglacier became an entirely different boss when it added those voice lines, which at the time were seen as adding more immersion for everybody else, but for you, made you actually able to fight the thing, correct?
Correct. Yeah. That was, I still go back to that because it was, I had, up until that point, I wasn't having any luck with the Elder God Wars bosses, right? Like, and I kind of anticipated that. Bossing's always been very difficult, but Carapac was, with the field of view, the problem is I just can never move fast enough, and there's so much going on with that boss that it was, you know, not the best experience for me. But the Arc Glacier was, I mean, that was incredible once those voice lines came in, you know, and then we went a little bit backwards with Crucis.
but Crosus got better when it got its colorblind mode.
It did. And it's definitely in a better spot than it was. But
At launch,
yeah,
and
for sure.
And this has been the whole story of what we really wanted to highlight in this last segment, is that throughout RuneScape's 20-plus year history, at this point, starting in 2001 from that fixed web browser game to where we are at today, an immersive MMO, it's been a journey for RuneScape accessibility. There have been examples of things that were very good back in the day. There have been examples of things that were very bad back in 2004. But you can say the same thing about 2019 and 2020 as well. Yeah. And I personally, and I don't know if you agree with this, Tanis, because you're on the front lines of this, I feel like things have gotten better over time than they used to be. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh, I think that's a very fair assessment, and that was something that I noticed earlier in the show when Mod Pebble said she's been focusing on this for the last couple of years, and I'm like,
yeah,
last couple of years
it's when really things started really getting better.
Yeah, seriously.
And that, you know, brings us to the modernization of RuneScape. Object highlighting, that was very much a mobile thing, but it's available on desktop now if you want it. Dotted paths for tutorials would be great if there was more of those. Interface scaling, huge when you combine that with text scaling and graphical reworks. And like you said at the beginning of the show, Mod Pebble, you look at interface scaling, it might be something that you're playing RuneScape, you know, today you don't feel like you need, but maybe one day your glasses break and you need to activate that 300% UI scaling mode. And
Absolutely.
There you go, you have that available for you. And as we start to wrap this up here, what is your favorite RuneScape accessibility feature of things we've talked about or things that we might not have talked about here? Because you're obviously immersed in this as part of your job. What do you see as an accessibility hotspot for RS3 right now?
It's a very interesting question. There's a lot going on in RuneScape, so it's very hard to sort of pick any one thing.
Okay.
I think it's definitely the greater understanding of having audio and visual cues in PvM boss fights, or just skilling in general. And I think that is a fundamental in just our boss designs getting a lot better in general, where like a boss will have a audio cue and then a visual cue. there's obviously still work to be done, but it's nice to see that start to get better within our game in general. I think in terms of pure accessibility features, it's got to be UI scaling for me.
All right, fair.
I think it was definitely a feature. It's one of those other examples of this is good for everyone, because UI scaling was terrible for 4K streams, for example, where the UI would be really small and it would be really hard to read. And fixing something like that also is by extension adding accessibility options and making it easier for those who have difficulties with sight to now be able to read the text and stuff on the screen.
All right.
So I think that's that for me. Probably.
Yeah, that's fair. And I know I can definitely see that push, because I remember when Zamorak came out this past summer, there were a few of his attacks that were missing the voice cue, and it was patched into the boss within a couple weeks, which, you know, when I learn a new boss, the voice cues are something that I use to help me along because of, as you mentioned, visual clutter. So even as somebody who doesn't use accessibility options most of the time, I greatly appreciated those audio cues, and I think that leans into what you're saying about how it's just become more present over time on that, and that's something that I can appreciate. So I don't think I have anything else for our segment here. Tanis, you have any further questions for Mod Pebble?
No, I just want to say thank you for putting a focus on accessibility and trying to improve the game in this way. It does make a difference, and there are a lot more people out there that face different challenges than I think a lot of us would think, you know, at first glance. So thank you, Mod Pebble.
Thank you. It's definitely nice to have that sort of recognition that it is working in places, and the team as a whole are getting a lot more awareness in this area. So
yeah,
it's coming a lot more naturally.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with us. I know it's late in the evening. This is your personal time, obviously, for this. We greatly appreciate it. And I'll just say, as we wrap this up, just remind everybody to go take the survey. You can find it linked in the show notes at update.show, or you can find it by going to rs.game/accessibility survey. Accessibility, capital A, survey, capital S. rs.game/accessibility survey. Thank you, Mod Pebble.
No problem. Thank you.
Before we move on and talk about the patch notes and the upcoming farming update, which I'm so eagerly anticipating for next week, I want to thank some Patreon supporters, because without you guys, this podcast wouldn't be possible, and we wouldn't get to have the same level of fun that we have bringing this to all of you right now. So this week, I'd like to thank Alaska, Amos Reed, Anatoly D, Andrew C, Arvids L, Bear Down, Beekeeper Steve, Big Huge Rat, Bryflex, Chunk the Monk, Diana, Drama Free, Elo Matey, Flazaman, Free Milk, G Hammy, Guy Lafleur, Jacob G, Jade Gizmo, Jason S, Jeebus, Jesse W, Jim M, Kesky Plays, Ling01, Malinoric, Mohan V, Nate the Great, Nick G, OTR Gamer, Pernasius, Ricky A, Samuel FL, Skiotan, Scott DS, Shirt Pants, Stubeve, Tanner JW, The Naked Captain, Tom V, and Zant. And if you're wondering why exactly there feels like there's more names this week, well, it's one of the Patreon perks that we have, but more on that in just a moment. If you want to know anything about our Patreon offerings, you can check that out at patreon.com/RSBANDB. So as I mentioned, all these people have subscribed to Patreon, but we do have a very, very generous starting plan. For as little as $1 a month, you gain access to an entire back catalog of, at this point, 50 plus extra bonus shows. 50 bonus shows of RSBANDB Update that we record and publish at the start of each month. We just recorded one this week on DailyScape Part 3. What could dailies do better in RuneScape? Sirion, Thaxi, and myself sat down for about an hour. We talked about just that, what dailies could do better. Of course, in Part 1, we built the DailyScape tier list, and in Part 2, we talked about the good and the bad aspects of Dailyscape in RuneScape, and then we tee it all off with the cherry on top of how dailies could look better in RuneScape. And you gain access to all those episodes and 50-odd other ones for as little as $1 a month. You also, of course, get a mention each and every week in our show notes, and you help fund the cost for hosting and production of RSBANDB Update. We also have a $3 per month tier. That's what all the names I just read out subscribe to, as it is the first week of the month. For $3 a month, you get a special VIP rank on Discord, including chat channel access, a mention on the podcast at the start of the month, and access to high-quality stereo versions of the show in addition to everything else. And if you want to give the ultimate gift, we have a $5 a month plan where you receive a shout-out every week and gain exclusive access to the outtakes that we use to make the clip show at the end of the year. And Tanis can attest to this. Over the past couple of weeks, there have certainly been some spicy ones in pre-show.
There's been a few. Mm-hmm.
And that tends to happen at this point of the year. I don't know whether it's just the atmosphere and we know clip shows coming up. We just start being a little bit more unhinged. Well, they do. I don't. I'm in charge of keeping everything on track. But we are, of course, working to the Hot Ones Challenge should we ever reach the mystical $500 a month tier. Tanis, myself, and a few others will subject ourselves to a whole range of spice on video. So if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, or you just want to support the podcast, or you like any of the other offerings that I've laid out, you can learn more about those at patreon.com/RSBNB. So thanks so much, everybody, for supporting us. It truly, truly means the world to us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, this week technically was Ninja Strike week, and patch notes associated with it, but we got lots of other news to discuss right now, so we're just going to run through some of these Ninja Strike patch notes right now. And the first one that popped out to my eyes is that the unicorn model has been updated across the game, and you know, it's just kind of worked its way in a little bit randomly into the patch notes. There was a comment made in Discord. Yes, they're updating the unicorn model because the next skill that comes to game is going to be the riding skill, and we're finally going to get mounts in game. I mean, that's a possibility, right?
Yeah,
an
never
expansion
know.
of the game world and mounts, but I don't know. I think it just goes within the general graphics purview that they've been doing of just improving things when it makes sense. And who knows, maybe a unicorn model will turn up in some quest at some point. Hence why maybe they got the budget to redo that one.
Maybe we'll get the sequel to the Owen quest, right? Or no, they actually skipped all over that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. Also, this week, a warning has been added for when your Blessed Flask is nearly running out. You'll now get a warning at 10, 5, and 1 doses remaining. That's good. Mm-hmm. I know that Blessed Flask is a lifesaver, especially for longer PVM events like the Zuck fight and whatnot. I know that was the kick in the pants for me to do it, because I always found I was using too much food in the Zuck fight, but I couldn't use the Vampirism aura or an accuracy aura because I needed to use the penance aura to ensure that I'd be able to last, the 25 to 35 minutes to get food. And obviously those are long kill times for normal, but that's just where I'm at in the PVM journey on that. So I appreciate that. And everybody should get a Blessed Flask if they have the level and haven't done so already. It's no longer possible to walk when reaching the first rock platform on the Heffen Agility course, and it's now possible to teleport away when standing near the start. So this is a two-parter, obviously, on the first one. It's good that there's only one kind of spot to land, because if you start moving around there, it gets kind of confusing about where exactly you want to put your clicker to start moving through that course, so I appreciate that. And it's also now possible to teleport away when standing near the start. I guess what that means is that if you were on the course, you couldn't teleport, which you don't want to lock players out from that. But how did you find Heffen Agility, the Heffen Agility course, from an accessibility standpoint? Because I could imagine that agility is not a fun topic for you.
No, and agility was always very, very challenging, but Heffen actually made it a little bit easier.
Well,
because
there you go.
You could spin that camera, and if you did it right, you could just click through the course, right? So that was the first time you could do that. All the other courses I always had trouble clicking on just the right spot to, start the obstacle. So Heaven was great for that. I didn't have to. I just
It's
had to
another one
move
of
the
those.
camera in the right spot.
It's another one of those stealth accessibility updates.
It really was, yeah.
They added a contribute all resources option to skilling stations on Aya, and added an option in the Anagronia base camp management to assign 5, 10, or all workers to a resource it existed in addition to the existing X amount option, which is important for all of us fresh starters out there. I hope everybody started Anachronia, because if you haven't and you're wanting to get into the farm, you're going to be kicking yourself, or anything else for that matter, on Anachronia.
Yep, I've done more with the Anachronia base camp on Fresh Start than I ever did on my main.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go. Yeah. So we got a series here of questionable patch notes, and it was like pulling teeth to find the answers to this. We couldn't find it in the wiki, we couldn't find it in the actual quest itself, and it wasn't until consulting with some other people, Rubik in particular, that we found out what was meant here. But what wound up happening is that the Shadow of the Storm quest has been improved as one patch note, the Priest in Peril quest has been improved as another patch note, the Nature Spirit quest has been improved as another patch note, and the Big Chompy Bird Hunting quest has been improved as another patch note. And with this, nobody knew what the heck was going on. It's like, was the quest completely rewritten to be more straightforward? Was there graphical changes? Were there changes to the rewards? Were there changes in terms of the accessibility in the quest? It could have been anything throughout this list. And the reason I'm calling this out is that these patch notes here saying they have been improved don't do anything for the players, telling them what exactly happened in that quest and what was improved in that patch note. And for us producing this podcast, it makes us pull our hair out because we're trying to figure out what exactly happened. And so this is a call out to the people at Jagex. If you're listening to this, let's try and make it so that when a quest is improved and it says the Priest in Peril quest has been improved in this patch note, let's, if possible, include a bullet point list of things that have been improved on that, and an example of some of the things that were done to all these quests. Quest items are now destroy instead of drop, which, we've been doing that for ages with quests, so that makes sense. NPC menu options have been standardized in terms of how they're punctuated. Swamp Bubbles and Ogre Bellows interact better. And this is actually another accessibility one, Tanis. Swamp Bubbles are now larger.
Nice.
There's new models in the Shadow of the Storm quest. The XP reward in the Shadow of the Storm quest has been turned into a combat XP lamp. Good for people who might not want combat XP. Silverlight, its dyed variants, have been increased in the amount of damage it does. And the Demonic Sigil Mold is no longer alchable. So this is what we're talking about in terms of improvements to these quests, and it wasn't until we sought out other people, in particular Rubik, who was able to sort through all this, that we were able to figure out, oh, this is what happened with these quests. And it would just be nice if these were itemized nicer in the patch notes. But
yeah, I envision these being on a giant list like what Mod Jack talked about a couple weeks ago, and then with everyone doing them again, in Fresh Start, they kept rising and rising and rising up the list until
could be.
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
These are all very early quest. Well, early to mid.
Well, yeah, and like you don't need to do Priest in Peril anymore or complete it to access Mauritania. You just need to kill the Gowl in the Paterdomus. And obviously you're going to do Nature Spirit if you want to harvest the mushrooms in the swamp. So those are quests that you're going to do relatively early on. Big Chompy Bird Hunting makes sense given the area. Shadow of the Storm as well. So you're right, and I do wonder if these are Fresh Start inspired. So good.
At least maybe raised on the priority list, right? Like
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And there's an old saying in terms of whether it be development or just in general business, that it's not always easy to make priorities. But if you don't have priorities, you're going to be cast kind of adrift, and you're not going to find success. So it's always good to see where the priorities lie in this, and that at the end of the day, going back to these mid-level and starter areas is still on the radar and a priority for Jagex. So with that, we move on to the Wilderness Flash events. An update that I've been interacting with a lot whenever the farming or the evil tree one comes out. I can't say no to a large XP lamp worth of farming when I'm at 108 farming. I can't say no to that in the position I'm at. So these are things I've been consistently looking at. Have you interacted with any of the Flash events since launch?
No, very little. You know, it's all good. It's really hard for me to drag myself away from what I am doing at that moment.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we talked about on launch week about how there just needs to be an easier way to get there without completing all the events.
Yeah, I mean, and I had high hopes. Like, I had done a couple of them thinking, I'll at least get through it so I can use the teleport. Yeah. And then
no, not yet.
I did a couple, and I never made it through all of them.
Yeah. But in any case, the King Black Dragon can no longer be damaged by poison during its immune stage. Oops. A broadcast is now displayed whenever a Flash event starts, as well as 5 minutes beforehand. Excellent. Means we don't need to watch the clock. That's really good. I like that. And location hints for some of the Flash events have been made more clear, which we said was another pain point in that. So this ticks all the boxes as we go, and I think just kind of rounds out the event. And even on Fresh Start, if you go to the main Fresh Start worlds and even some of the less populated worlds, the Flash events are still able to be completed with this. And that was one thing we were worried about on launch, but that so far, even on Fresh Start, has not proven to be a problem. So well done to Abe and Shrike on the team for working that through.
Very nice.
And there's your patch notes for the week, everyone. I want to note that ModJack had a live stream this week, specifically regarding quests and lore and the decisions made at the end of the Elder God Wars storyline. And as you guys know, we just had Mod Pebble on the show, and we want to allow the time for this live stream to be covered here at Update and do it justice. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover ModJack's live stream regarding the end of the Elder God Wars next week on the podcast. We'll have someone from our lore panel on board to discuss this and discuss the farming update at the same time with this, and I think we're just gonna have a good discussion, because we had our own theories, and it's gonna just be kind of nice to reconcile with what Jack had to say and what we were thinking at the time and what we thought before a year ago at this point, when we were trying to figure out what the exact end of it was going to be. So we just wanted to give that live stream the time that it deserves, and in order to do that, we need a full panel for that, and we're gonna be doing that next week on the podcast. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a lack of news to announce this week. One thing I've been looking for a long time is finally here, and that is that you can now get the soundtracks for the Elder God Wars. And alongside that, they've also released a second soundtrack called Echoes of Orthan, which is effectively the soundtrack for the Orthan dig site, amongst other places. And we know when they did Orthan, there was just such a great amount of ambience there with that. So they're both available on all the major music streaming platforms out there. So that's Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Deezer, and Tidal. And all you got to do is just head there, and you gain access to that soundtrack. And as with everything that they've done with RuneScape music, they're 100% streamable for free on these services, which is, it's just wonderful that Jagex makes all their soundtracks available for everybody. And if you want the higher quality version of that, there will be a vinyl version of these two that is shipping in 2023. So it doesn't look like it'll make it for the holiday season, but it's definitely something that you can put on your radar that will be that will be available later on. And, we go through all sorts of things here, from Azanadra's quest to the City of Sentistant music track, and, of course, the tracks for all of the bosses in the Elder God Wars, the Hetz Oasis soundtrack, and everything from Extinction all the way through the Zamorak boss fight. So that's a really epic soundtrack that covers, I think, and, when I say epic soundtrack, I feel like the soundtrack for the Elder God Wars enhanced it in so many ways that if you play with sound off, you're missing a huge chunk of the experience on that. And that's why I was so happy to see that they made the choice of getting this out there to soundtrack, because if you ask, what is RuneScape's top musical tracks, well, these ones are going to come up there along with other classics along the way, like the archaeology ones, and of course the remasters that happened in 2017, 2018. With that,
sea shanty, sea.
yeah, there you go, sea shanty 2. And just it's a cultural thing with RuneScape. Everybody who's played RuneScape will recognize that RuneScape music instantly,
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just in the UK, and it's not just in the US. And this is an interesting story of juxtaposition. A few days before people were wondering when the war in Ukraine was going to start, there was somebody in Kiev's downtown square live streaming in the anticipation that something was going to happen one night. And throughout that, there was background music tracks being played. And one of the tracks that came up was old school RuneScape's Sea Shanty 2 on a live stream of Kiev, Ukraine.
Okay.
So I'm trying to remember where we found that live stream or who found it, but somebody found that and showed that to me when Sea Shanty was playing. That was just, okay, this is the moment RuneScape has become a cultural icon throughout the world. And even if the modern stuff in RuneScape Elder God Wars hasn't attained that huge cultural prominence like some of the other classics have going back years, the RuneScape soundtrack is just something that's so iconic and makes the game experience that anytime we have the opportunity to listen to that is something I take up on. So.
Yep, absolutely.
And this is through their existing partner, LacedRecords.com. So, all right. I was happy that we got that announcement, but I was also happy that we got this announcement launching on Monday, the Garden of Kharid. And we're not going to dive too much into this today, because we're going to save all the analysis on the Garden of Kharid until Monday. Because with that, this is the farming update that folks have been talking about, and the herb rebalance, that it's actually tied between an update, and they weren't just going to go out there and, put a ninja strike together, say, hey, bosses no longer drop herbs and you can plant these seeds. Now there's actually a gameplay mechanic behind it that was detailed a couple weeks back in ModJack's live stream. So we've already touched on planting multiple herbs per patch, so I'm not going to go too much into that today. But one thing we did learn is that there's new thieving opportunities in the garden that'll require 42 and 83 thieving, and the XP rates will be competitive for that level band, and they drop 2 new rewards called the Catalytic and Elemental Anima Stones that are used to increase the number of runes you receive from each rune essence by 2, and obviously the catalytic ones are used for things like mind, body, chaos, and so on and so forth, and then the elemental ones are your air, water, earth, and fire runes. Yeah, I know. Ooh, right?
Yeah. All right, cool.
There's that, and there's going to be unlocks that you get that allow you to plant more herbs or more herb seeds in the patches, and we were under the anticipation that this was going to be a blanket. You're going to be able to ram 10 seeds in there on launch day, but no, you're going to buy these as unlocks, and you're going to get these points passively while you herb farm. And the way it works is that for 250 points, you can plant 2 seeds, 1250 for 7,500, 7, and 25,000, 10 herb seeds. So it's going to take a while for people to work up to that, and people are actually going to need to do farming to unlock this benefit, along with the other benefits that were mentioned, like skipping the growth phases or making it so that essence sticks are made faster and essence effects are no longer removed upon death is another good one. So there's going to be opportunities for people here to take part in this who aren't just the farmers among us. They're also adding in a secondary source for patch bombs and the growth potions that we find at the Manor Farm, which is kind of neat when you think about it, because the best way to get them right now is through beans at the Manor Farm. But lo and behold, if you don't want to do the player-owned farm, here's another way of getting those, and that's what we've talked about before on that. And you'll notice I'm running through this kind of quickly, and that's because I want to save all the analysis on this for next week once I get my hands on it. But that 2 new things that were mentioned with this. First, diseased farming patches. We were thinking that might just be only for herbs where they would stop growing, but they're doing that for all farming patches. Dead crops are going to be the thing of the past. They'll just stop growing when they get diseased.
I love it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I feel, as somebody who likes the farming scale, that farming was already in a pretty good place, but maybe the sentiment is that amongst most of the community that they don't like farming, so they have to give it more buffs. Is like, am I the only one that likes farming, or is that
no? I just think like the dead crops were. It's just a bummer because you're in the farming, so you're maximizing that. But if you don't maximize, you don't get the kind of yields that you normally get, and they do die. Yeah. And when it comes to trees, think about how painful that is.
That's expensive, and I felt that on Fresh Start. That's why I didn't start actively tree farming until last week when I had a sufficient flow of money coming in.
Well, there you go.
Yeah. Also, the Farmer's Catalyst Fragment from Sliskay's Endgame will now cure diseased patches when worn, and grants shadow-infused herbs whenever you cure a patch with it. That's neat. And compost bins have also been tweaked so that there's now a single central compost bin, and they access a single compost mound, which will hold up to 1,000 of each processed compost type and 1,000 of each unprocessed type. You'll get 3 compost every 5 minutes, which is quicker than we're at right now. You don't need to, because right now you need to wait for the entire bin to be done doing its thing. The bins will have been graphically updated. The player-owned farm Bull Perk now offers a 1 in 5 or 1 in 3 chance to prevent half of the compost being processed from being consumed. So there's just updates all around on this, and these were things that weren't mentioned, of course, in the Mod Jack live stream, but these are new aspects that we're just learning of this week, and I can already see these things helping people who are leveling up, because one of the biggest roadblocks to using compost is that you want to get access to it quickly, but nobody, unless you really know the skill inside and out, you don't know how long it takes for compost to go from what you put into the bin until usable. Yeah. Whereas with this, it puts it up right front and center. 3 compost every 5 minutes, and that's, you wait 15 minutes for that, and that's enough for your herb run. So that's actually a really good thing on that. But we'll save all the oohing and ahhing on this, the further oohing and ahhing, I should say, until next week when this arrives. Here's another good one. The Belladonna patch has been renamed to Nightshade, and Belladonna seeds are now Cave Nightshade, and they are affected by all the other buffs that herb patches have, because previously they would only give 1 Nightshade per, and if you wanted to get Nightshade in any meaningful way, you had to go to the Scavid Cave and do it the old-fashioned way. With this, you could actually work this into a farming run now, multiple times a day.
Okay. I can't remember what that Nightshade is used for, but I do remember going to that cave and getting it. Okay. Weapon poison.
For a long time before they changed the herb lore yak tracks to just raw XP when they were actual potions, weapon poison was the most efficient way of doing that, because if you gathered your own nightshade, like I did, you could actually make a profit on that.
Okay.
So this is going to be something to watch out for, to see if nightshade and weapon poison becomes more profitable after this, with nightshade being easier to get and more people looking into it. But, this is one of those things that's off to the side. I don't anticipate it to crash in value because of this update, but for people who are wanting to do something with farming and herblore and the ecosystem they provide, here's your chance.
Yeah, and it's a nice update for those who are making their own stuff, right?
Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Iron Man Light, fresh start.
Yeah, and I don't need to tell you how complicated it is for iron characters to get weapon poison.
Yeah,
especially
I'm
plus
sure.
plus plus.
Mm-hmm.
But the big changes come to thieving. The Sticky Fingers relic power, which is the one that let you automatically pickpocket with a single click, is now a baseline feature of pickpocketing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Remember when Prif brought that in? Like, yes, it's the best.
Now it's everywhere.
And now it's normal, yeah. Do you remember how hard it was to do monkey knife fighters?
Oh, God, yeah.
And
with this, anybody who plays RS3 goes back to old school, it's going to be like going back to the Dark Ages for thieving.
Yeah, for real.
But, I mean, I don't think this is going to dethrone safe cracking or anything, so let's just be 100% real with that.
Well, no, I mean, not on an XP level.
No.
It can't.
But,
oh, wait a minute.
But on a lean back mobile level, oh boy.
Wait a minute.
It gets better, though.
There is one thing that is better.
What's that?
Than safe cracking that was pickpocketing.
What?
Dwarf traders.
Ooh. Well, the Sticky Fingers relic power will still be useful because it speeds up the rate at which you pickpocket now by 50%, which in turn works into a 50% XP buff for thieving if you're using Sticky Fingers.
And it makes it automatic, right? Like, so.
Oh, yeah.
So, ooh.
So it's going to be automatic and faster now.
Yeah. Watch out.
As a result, the Master Camo outfit will no longer auto pickpocket, but retains the increased chance of success and stun avoidance, which is good.
Nice.
And the Desert Phoenix will no longer require you to complete the hard desert achievements to automatically pick feathers.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, another thing for herblore and farming. Mm-hmm. So, as much as I like the farming stuff, this announcement of the thieving changes seems pretty big as well.
It makes I might have to do some thieving when this comes in.
Yeah, and I mean, we get access to this on Fresh Start as well, so...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, go. Yeah, like watch out. It might be on.
And we did
and I do have invention, so maybe I'll go over there and make me a few soul in the boxes, and away we go.
And see, this is the thing about scaling updates. We get excited about these the same way PVMers get excited about new toys.
That's true.
And I think we're going to have a fun discussion next week with me on the farming side, you on the thieving side, and just, going back and forth about how all this goes. And I can't wait to get my fingers into both of these updates.
Mm-hmm.
And we did get confirmation of what's happening with the loot table changes with this. So all bosses that drop grimy herbs will now drop seeds of the same type in reduced amounts. So goodbye to Tellus dropping hundreds or thousands of herbs for those 24/49 runs.
Bye.
Abyssal Lords, Vire Lords, and Nature's Grove creatures have had their herb drops reduced, and you can still get herbs the normal way from Slayer creatures, but at a reduced rate. So they did reduce them.
Mm-hmm. And it's fair. Everyone gets a little bit messy. It's fair.
Yeah, and I think with this we also gate the additional seeds per patch to people who are actively involved in farming, because we're looking at 250, 1250, 7500, 25,000 points from the Kharid garden in order to unlock these additional herb seeds being used. So it's not something we're all going to have on day one. You actually need to do herb farming stuff. And, for me, a while back, I hit the point where I really felt I didn't need much money anymore, so I stopped doing herb runs on my main. And as a result of this, I will be picking up the herb runs again next week. And it's important to note with this that your higher level herbs are going to grant more points. So that means things like your fel stalks and your toad flax, your toad flax, your torstals are the ones you're going to want to be doing with this.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's at this point, I'll mention that we do have a micro lesson at youtube.com/RSBANDB about how to do a herb run in 2022 and how to optimize that. Though after this update drops, we'll need to add a few things to that. So it's relevant for now until Monday. Wink. All right. I don't know where we go from this, because I feel like the update's not even here yet, and I'm looking forward to it for so much. But
I know.
I think we cracked the code today on the fan content creation policy and just what the hell was happening with that this summer.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think we finally have our answer.
Yeah. And it turns out that Titan Publishing will be publishing RuneScape comics and graphical novels starting in 2023 alongside original fiction and coloring books based on the RuneScape IP. So there we have it. There we have it.
And I'm definitely, like I said, I've never collected comic books or anything. I'm gonna buy these.
Yeah, and for anybody who doesn't know, Titan is actually a very big deal in the case of fandom comic book publishing and fandom magazines and periodicals and such, in that they're the ones who publish the big magazines like the Star Trek Explorer and the Star Wars equivalent variant of it. They're the ones who publish those magazines every quarter or so. So this is a big deal for Jagex on this route. And there's a quote in the article here from Mod Pip's Jagex CEO Phil Mansell, who says that we're excited to be working with Titan to bring new RuneScape stories to fans of the franchise globally through new mediums, and Titan is a powerhouse in the world of publishing and are the perfect partner for Jagex to bring these new stories to life. So there's that. And Titan co-publishers Vivian Chang and Nick Landau added in a joint statement that they've been following the RuneScape IP for many years and are now thrilled to be working with the brilliant and creative team at Jagex. And it's always fun to work on a project with such a passionate fan base. And they haven't announced when we're going to see these, but it will be in 2023. And it will be, of course, oh, hello, Siri. It will be...
Yes.
It will be around, of course, the graphic novels, comics, and coloring books.
Okay. I'm looking forward to collecting the comics, and I'm definitely gonna read the novels, right? Like, it's right up my alley. It's the kind of stuff I like to read.
Yeah, and they're graphic novels too, right? And we know, and what'll be interesting to see with those is, do they bring the style from the 2D cutscenes that we've been seeing in the quest to the graphical novels, right? Or is it going to be an artist interpretation of what we have in game right now?
Well, I mean, either way,
that's a big deal, because
sounds pretty cool.
Because when we talk with Mod Blackwidge environment artists, there's just so much passion on the art team around RuneScape, and you got to imagine that it's going to be some of these people putting their hands on this and delivering this through Titan to the RuneScape fans. Yeah,
definitely.
And I remember a little book from 2004 or 2005 by a company called Scholastic that was a RuneScape handbook, essentially. And then, of course, we had the novels along the way by T.S. Church, but we really haven't seen anything major since then that's been published in such a way, aside from the 20th anniversary book So this is gonna be big, and we'll have to wait and see where this goes, because it offers an opportunity, I think, to not only kind of supplement the existing RuneScape world that we have, but let's also just look at all the other development that happens to other IPs when they go for the graphic novel or comic, right?
Oh yeah, and I mean, even we got Jared, didn't we, from the previous novels?
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'm a werewolf guy. Kinda.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We did talk about that with Chaos Elemental this past summer. But we'll be keeping our eye on this, and just like all the other partnerships that have sprouted up, we'll be sure to shine the light of when this arrives for everybody else. So, looking forward to it. All right. So as we start to wrap up the show, one thing that RuneScape players always look forward to, and I think everybody talks about it week to week, is Jagex going to survive another year? Is Jagex doing well financially? Are they? Is something bad happening at the company? Like, a week doesn't go by where we don't see something like that.
Yep.
Well, we got the 2021 fiscal year financial report this past week. And we're going to go through some of the headline items right now, and then we'll maybe offer some thoughts about what this means. So, first and foremost, revenue growth of 4% year over year from the previous year, from about 120 million to 125 million Great British pounds or so. So, increase in revenue, but profit was down 5% from 39 million to 37 million pounds, and in the report they attribute this to the sale of the company through the Carlyle Group. But when you look at the report and you start factoring in other things like interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization of assets, the profit that the company sees is roughly the same year over year. And one reason they were able to accomplish this is that it's partially due to a tax relief program run by the UK government that's specifically aimed at video game producers, among all things. So that helped Jagex on this run.
Never thought I would cheer a tax cut, but yay.
Also, if you look into the report, Jagex says with this that they have 1.1 million subscribers, and this is held constant or so from 2019 through the end of 2021.
Yeah, this is. I was so surprised at this number. This is a great number. I mean, or at least it sounds great, right? Like 1.1 million. I'm like, wow, that's
and obviously we don't see 1.1 million people playing RuneScape games every day. It's closer to that 120,000 ish or so marker when you factor in what's going on, but you got to keep in mind that that's a rotating door, and when you start looking at that 1.1 million doesn't look like that absurd of a number.
Oh, I think it's great.
Also, fiscal year 2021, and this is the part that people might have some trouble with, saw a high return rate for lapsed players, and RuneScape product revenue grew by 20%, and I quote, "This was driven by launching on mobile and the success of in-game seasonal events."
Turns out mobile wasn't a failure.
That's right. And in-game seasonal events. How many ults did people have for that thing called the Golden Party Hat?
Lots. Uh-huh.
And obviously that's right there for that at the tail end of the year. And, we knew that's what was happening with that. Obviously celebrate 20 years and such, but the Golden Party Hat was such a big deal. It brought everybody together on the community side, and we knew that this would be what we would see. But return of lapsed players and an increase in RuneScape product revenue growth by 20% due to mobile and those seasonal events. And it just shows, like you said, why mobile is so damn important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the interesting one, and people are going to, on the RS3 side, might point some fingers at this, but I don't want anybody to point some fingers at this, because The report also says that old school revenue decreased by 7% year over year, and Jagex says that this is due to numbers normalizing because numbers were higher during the COVID lockdown period. So
yeah, I can see this. I mean, it wasn't too long ago when we were wondering if old school was polling the weight, and we figured out that it's not, but it's actually, this is, I don't think it's doing well or anything.
Yeah, old school is doing well as it is, and I don't want anybody to be pointing fingers at old school and saying that they're not doing well for this, because their explanation with old school being a purely subscription-based game, that they had higher subs during COVID, and that's normalizing now, sees that drop of 7% year over year. That makes sense. And with this, you can actually see this in the breakdown of revenues, in that the fiscal year 21 subscription revenue dropped to £88.9 million from £91.7 million the previous year. And we'll factor that in, of course, to the old school side and the drop that they saw. But on the other hand, microtransaction revenue was up to £34.5 million from £28 million. And the point I saw being made online with this is that microtransaction revenue up, subscription revenue down. But the way to look at this, I think, is to look at the microtransaction revenue as being revenue from RS3, and then that drop in revenue being due to that decreased 7% year-over-year old school revenue decrease.
Yeah, and look, I don't have a problem if microtransaction revenue goes up because you're buying it. You don't have to.
Exactly. It lets the people who have the disposable income fund the game for the rest of us.
Exactly.
So, and I just wanted to highlight that again, that, please don't make and point the finger and say that RuneScape subscription revenue is going down, but microtransaction revenue is going up. If you just actually look into the report and provide the full context of it, you'll see that drop in subscription revenue is due to the decrease in old school revenue due to things normalizing because of COVID. And that's why I laid out these points 1, 2, 3 ABC rather than trying to, go for some clickbaity headline like I've seen done online already this past week. So I just want to make it clear to our listeners and people who might be joining us for the first time that if you're looking for that kind of sensationalism, you're not going to find that here.
No, and that sensationalism misses the most obvious point, which is it wouldn't increase if nobody wanted it. Obviously, people do want it, and they're paying for it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, that to me, like that's the most obvious thing in the world. It wouldn't go up if no one wanted it.
Right.
It wouldn't.
Yeah, and the silliest thing about that comparison was that you look at the comparison being made between subscription revenue going down and microtransaction revenue going up. But if you read the full report, it says that the reason it went down was because of that old school amount. And it's just disingenuous to not include that if you're going to be talking about that. So,
yep.
Other revenue, which they class as ticket sales and merchandise, shot up to £1.3 million from £239,000. I don't exactly know what fits the bill.
Well, there weren't any tickets. I mean,
No.
we weren't
Rune
doing
festing. No.
I guess the board game came out, but there's no way that.
No, the board game's not for sale yet, and this is 2021.
Yeah.
What is this? The book?
Is it the merchandise? Is it the merch?
It's got to be.
Yeah, it's got to be the merch store then. Yeah.
But an extra £1.1 million from that? I don't know.
People like their merch.
I know, and that's a big question mark for me. So.
Yeah, huh.
Let's see. And then I think the last thing I want to mention is that people often wonder where Jagex gets its revenue. £15.6 million came from the UK, $15.9 million from the European Union, and $69.7 million from the US, and then $23.6 million from the rest of the world.
That's right.
So,
We're your sugar daddy.
So as with
right here.
obviously, RuneScape gets the stereotypical finger painting of being a British-based game, but the bulk of the revenue does come from the U.S. on this.
Yeah. So let's have a Rune Fest over here, guys. Over here.
Was it last week, or was that at the round table we mentioned that RuneFest in Las Vegas would be the most sensible choice?
I think it was at the round table,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. We said either Vegas or Florida somewhere, I think. So
yeah. Come see your sugar daddy.
All right. Well, that's all we got for RuneScape news this week. We're going to start wrapping the show up. But before we do that, I'll just give everybody your weekly reminder that if you want to have a community focused around Fresh Start Worlds, you can join us in our Friends chat, which is BitsBytes. You can also check out our clan that we have on Fresh Start Worlds called Fresh Quest. Lots of the podcast folks are in there. I'm in there. Axie is in there. Pernasius is in there. Just find Fresh Quest guest in it, and if you want an invite, just ask anybody. Anybody can invite, and we do that. So that's BitsBytes for the Friends chat and Fresh Quest for the clan. And I'll also say, if you want your Fresh Start World's progress track, just head on over to update.show/FSW and enter in your RuneScape name and tell us if you want to have your achievements read out on the podcast. And if you do, we'll start tracking your Fresh Start account. And if you get any 99s or 120s, we'll announce them on the show, just like I'm about to do so right now. We got 4 of them on Fresh Start this week. So starting off on the 3rd, we have you, Tanis, with FSW. Tanis79 with 99 mining on November 3rd. Congrats.
Thank you.
We also have Fresh Soupy, who got 120 archaeology on the 3rd.
Ooh.
LeBron's Gains with 99 thieving on the 2nd. It's an interesting name. And FSW Mage God with 99 summoning on the 1st. Congratulations to you all. And I want to hear more about that mining adventure in the What Have We Been Doing section.
Okay.
And we also do have some regular achievements this week, including Atmohua, who got 120 ranged on the 2nd. Matt258 got 120 herblore on the 2nd. And Skips got 99 dungeoneering on October 31st.
Nice. And then moving to October 3rd, we have Donna with 99 fishing. We have October 29th for Muse and 99 Hunter. And then for Maheen, we have 99 Divination on October 27th. And Woody won with 120 Attack on October 27th.
Nicely done, everybody. Always nice to see these achievements popping up, and these Fresh Start ones are starting to become more and more prevalent. So looking forward to see what happens as we head into the final weeks of the competitive period. So I have a pick of the week this week that I'm going to highlight, and this is something you might have used in the past, and it's something that all people who are doing a reinstall of Windows or doing a new system build will want to have in their back pocket, and it's a tool and website called Ninite at NINITE.com. And what this is it's a tool that basically says, I'm going to be installing a bunch of software onto my Windows PC, and there's a grid of checkboxes that shows what you might want to get. So you just go along this and say, I want Chrome, I don't need any security software, I want Zoom, I want Discord, I want Google Drive, and then for the development stuff, I'll take Visual Studio Code, WinMerge, Putty, and WinSCP. People who are involved in that side of the world will know what I mean. Oh, and we want Notepad++ too. Media side, we want iTunes and VLC and Handbrake. And then from there, there's a whole bunch of other options like utilities, like a classic start menu, Terracopy, image management tools like ShareX, which I recommend for capturing screenshots, 7-Zip, so on and so forth. And there's a huge, huge list on this, and it's even got Steam on here And then after you just check all these check boxes, you just say get your 99, and it gives you a customized executable that you just download and you run. And you just click it once, and it installs everything that you checked. So gone are the days of running through to this dozen-plus list of websites, downloading all the installers and installing them one by one. This installs everything in one shot on this list. It's as simple as that. And, you know,
one and done.
Windows has been getting better in terms of its reset feature and whatnot, but sometimes you just wind up doing one of those fresh Windows installs. Maybe you get a new hard drive, something like that. Maybe your hard drive dies, and you just get a new install, and you say, I just need to move my documents folder over, and I want to install some software along the way. Well, 99 is the best way to do that. It's Windows only, and you know, you look at this, and they have an impressive list of companies that actually use 99, particularly the Pro version, including Sony, Lockheed Martin, Tupperware, Pepsi, the National Institute of Health in the UK, and NASA, just to name a few. So this is a piece of software that people probably haven't heard of that often, but it's a definite tool that you want to have in your back pocket if you're ever going to be installing Windows, because there's on this list of software, some of these softwares will try and install toolbars in your web browsers and such and sell you on adware, whereas 99 doesn't do any of that. So that's the way to go.
Yep, for sure.
It's also got paint.net, which I also recommend. And you can just see this. You go through this list, and then you realize how much software you use. And I don't use Windows as my main daily driver, but you'll still find all these pieces of software on my Windows computer. So that's why it's just so important, even for somebody who doesn't use it as their daily driver. So, 99.com. What have you been up to on Fresh Start this week?
Been mining, and so I moved up to Anamica. I've been doing that on Anachronia.
Ooh, okay.
So yeah, because I didn't want to go through questing and stuff, and did not want to do Underground Pass again. So realized that from talking to one of my friends, Anachronia was a good place where I could get like Anamica and all that. So started working on it there, and it was remarkably fast compared to what I remembered. I this is the first time going from ground up through, mining, and it wasn't bad. It was enjoyable. I stayed active with the Rocketunities, which actually added, a lot to the skill, and I really enjoyed it. I never once, we can't do lazy mode, right? We don't have juju potions and stone spirits and stuff like that. So, we're doing it, purely as intended and designed, and enjoyed it greatly. So hit my 99 mining, and we are ready to start the smithing journey, which we're at 85 right now, and I'm guessing with all the ore that I have and stuff, I should be able to hit 99 smithing as well.
Nice. All right, and you're still enjoying it each and every day.
I'm loving it. Like I'm thinking, like, right now it's like, okay, when I'm done with smithing, what am I going to go for? Am I going to go wood cutting, or am I going to go fishing? Like, both of them allow me to train my invention, but which one do I want to do? Like, so I'm still thinking about, like, well, just exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm like, am I gonna do a change of pace and maybe get one combat skill in? Maybe, I don't know. So it's still kind of theory crafting as I go, as well. So yeah, I'm loving Fresh Start.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that, and that's been my general sentiment throughout all this as well. Even though I've been farming, what's going on?
I forgot. Also had something else happen this week.
Right, I know where you're going.
I got Rocky. I think his
Nice.
name's Rocky.
You have that
Yeah.
one on your main?
Yeah, so now I
Okay,
have
good.
two.
So you're gonna have the Halo.
Yep, I got 2 Halo tokens, and now I got a Cape token. So we're token collectors.
and you know, that's what was in it for the mains on Fresh Start, and it's going to be fun when we start seeing all these things come back to main. It's like, oh, you were on Fresh Start. What was your experience like? What did you do? And you know, what was your role in the economy? And that sort of thing. So those are gonna be fun stories to share. I know for me, my story is that I'm gonna be one of the few who's been providing flowers to the community to make the powders of penance and whatnot. Those are always fun to see just how much people are willing to spend on those. And as with that, you can probably guess that I'm still at Hetz Oasis doing all that farming there. I went from 105 last Friday to now I'm at 108. I got 108 yesterday.
Nice. You think you're going to hit that 120?
Oh yeah. I'm going to get 120 done. Definitely.
Hell yeah.
The question is going to be when those dinosaurs start rolling in, because at this point I'm gathering wood, vines, and stone to build a breeding pen on Anachronia. Finally.
Nice. It's coming.
Finally. That Anachronia has been the thing holding me back. Ever since 92, finishing the Manor Farm and getting dragons going there, I've been working towards getting Anachronia done, but it's taken that long. And keep in mind, I'm 4 days behind because I didn't start Anachronia until day 4, gathering resources for base camp and whatnot. Because that breeding pen is 100,000 wood, vine, and stone, which means that in order to build that, you need the final storehouse upgrade, because the second storehouse only holds 80,000.
Wow.
And the breeding times of these dinosaurs are so long, I mathed this out. Do I just build the large pens and hope they breed in there? Or do I wait for the breeding pen? And I decided I was going to wait for the breeding pen and use that. So I hope I made the right decision in that, which puts me a little bit later on the dinosaur front, but hopefully we'll be able to get that stuff rolling sooner rather than later. I've also instituted a new full farming run that I will be doing each and every day. As it goes right now, each and every day I do 10 magic trees, 4 Siku trees, and 1 Kalquit tree. And over the span of about 10 days, that provides me an additional 5 million XP.
Wow, okay. Now, how do you find that without having all of our little nifty teleports and stuff?
Oh, well, the ones to Karamja are really easy, because there's the charter ship, which goes to the fruit tree patch, and the lodestone, which goes to the Kalquit. The hardest ones to get to are the gnome ones, particularly Gnome Stronghold and Tree Gnome Village. Gnome Stronghold, what I've been doing, and I just run from the Manor Farm, in all honesty. That's what I've been doing for that one. And for the Gnome Village, I run from the Lodestone. I could probably, get some Rings of Dueling and get Castle Wars rings and run from there, just to save a little bit of time off that, now that I think about it. But everything else, every other tree patch is pretty much close to a Lodestone with that, so we're thankful for that.
Okay, yeah, I was curious about that.
Yeah, it's not too bad, and I mean, you can still get it done in one run of the Green Fingers aura, which I should mention, we're now up to tier 3 auras that everybody has access to for free. If you didn't know that, one of the underappreciated benefits of Fresh Start Worlds is you get access to all the auras for free.
Yep.
I've also resorted to farming my own mushrooms, so every other day I'll spend about an hour on the Ark just farming mushrooms to feed the Zygomites, because as we know, this is an economy where the sellers set the price, and I'm not going to be paying huge amounts for mushrooms because I'd rather spend that money on seeds. But, safe to say I've found some people who are buying my fruit who are in the Herblore race. I've found, obviously through the Grand Exchange, people willing to buy the flowers. So with that, money hasn't been a problem for me through farming. Interestingly enough, that I'm sitting on just north of 32 million GP that come tomorrow I'll be buying more magic and Siku seeds with. So
nice. Who would have thought farming would be so profitable?
Yeah, and I think it's only Fresh Start Worlds because people need the fruits for primal pulp, and people want the golden flowers to make the powder of penance for their PVM ventures.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's doing it. I also moved from frogs to salamanders at the small patch on, or the small pen at the Ranch Out of Time, which is an interesting thing in itself because you can actually buy the salamander eggs directly from the shop there, right, for beans. And what's good about salamanders compared to frogs is that the salamanders are bean positive, so that when you sell the 6 salamanders back, you're still making money on the beans. Whereas with the frogs, you were losing money on the beans.
Oh, well, that's cool.
So that's basically free farming XP, because when you think about it, you're putting the beans in from a Zygamite or a dragon elsewhere. Previously, those beans were leaving your stockpile, but now you're actually getting some more when you do the salamanders. So there's all sorts of little niches within the farming skill, and it's actually a pretty complex skill when you start drilling it down. And I think a lot of people haven't really dove that deep into it, and that's why we're going to be seeing another update to farming come this Monday. So I think that's my theory, at least. It'd be interesting to see what the analytics say on that. But I don't have anything else for this episode of Update. Do you?
Nope, it was jam-packed.
It was. So with that, thank you again to Mod Pebble for talking to us about accessibility and Purple Tuesday. Please do go fill that survey out. You can find it in the show notes at update.show. And, of course, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to get it delivered automatically to you, the best way to do that is to subscribe. You can visit update.show/subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Pocket Cast, Amazon, Stitcher, and more. You can find all of them at update.show/subscribe. And we're also on YouTube at youtube.com/RSBANDB. That's where we post some of our nibbles and, of course, the full video versions of the show. So with that being said, we'll be back next week to discuss the farming update in Kharid's garden and talk about ModJack's livestream with a member of our lore panel. So with that being said, we'll see you next week for another episode of RSBANDB Update. Take care, everyone.
See ya.